Yana, you're building an off-grid life in the jungle with your husband, Rob. Can you tell us about how your life led up to this moment?
Oh, Joy, you have a few hours. Hmm. I'll start with one of the childhood memories that I have. It was a reoccurring experience of feeling so much magic inside of myself, feeling this world is very magical, and um, there is so much that we cannot see, but I was feeling it. And yet my external reality, for some reason, was not reflecting what I was feeling. And I think that's what set me on a search. Of course, it was not a conscious decision, but there was a certain unsettledness. And I think if you know the story of Alchemist of Paulo Coelho, of the
Mm-hmm.
Santiago shepherd who just felt the call, had a dream and felt the call to find this
Uh-huh.
treasure somewhere. So in some way, that's my story where at the age of 16, I left my hometown, I left my family, and I moved to Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, where I was born. And I finished high school, and I entered college, and I studied linguistics, English and Turkish, and I ended up moving to Turkey when I was 20, and I lived 10 years in Istanbul, and I thought I built a life there. I did my MBA, and I had a good career, and I bought my apartment, and na. And then I thought that was it. But in 2008, I visited New York, and I would remember also another moment of sitting in the Central Park, and I had such a strong feeling that one day I would be living there. And to kind of anchor that moment, I wrote an email to my mom and close friends saying, this is what I'm experiencing, and I think that's what will happen one day. And in that time, I was in a committed relationship. I was doing my MBA. I had a really great job, so nothing was showing that that would happen. And in some moment in my life, it did happen. And in the end of 2013, I moved to New York with kind of a couple of suitcases and tourist visa and just a dream and a call that I had. And then it was another 10 years there where first I had to lose myself and then found myself in a different way, where I fulfilled my American dream and gained some financial success, and then realizing that's not what I was looking for, like that's not the magic I was feeling as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's how my spiritual awakening started to happen, where these questions of who am I, why am I here? And I think many of us at some point, let's say somewhere around mid-30s, more or less, we start asking that question, which from as an astrologist, I can explain from the point of there's this planet Saturn, which is responsible for our karma and dharma, like kind of like meaning in life. That it matures around mid-30s, and so that's kind of like we all experience that, questioning and sometimes crisis. And mine came from seemingly financial success, and then I just found myself in a very deep hole of meaninglessness of the life that I had. And I was working at a very high level with oligarchs and politicians, and that's kind of like the life that brought me to that awakening and to a further deeper search. And just to try to fit it in a few sentences, something so profound as you can imagine, and you've gone through your own journey yourself. But there were many steps, and I think I believe in karma, I believe in reincarnation, and I believe that we receive some guidance, which is just innate in us. It's just something that is so familiar to us. And in my case, I started practicing. At that time, I was doing yoga. I cannot say I was practicing very early, like in my early 20s. It was more like a physical practice, but it just really felt good for my body. And even early in my life, I started to practice some asceticism, of avoiding, meat or sugar or salt and laying on a flat ground, and which was very surprising for like a 10, 12-year-old child. But I guess some memories were showing up. In yogic term, we call them samskaras.
Mm-hmm.
And then in that process, the time frame I'm talking about in New York is 2017, kind of spring to summer. I received this message. I started to kind of meditate, and I received this message that I need to practice yoga daily. It was my more physical practice, which I would do a few times a week, but the message was very clear that this should become my practice and I should start daily. And that's what happened. I was doing meditation and yoga practice, and it just started slowly opening myself to the invisible realms, to the deeper dimension of life. And um, it started to call me deeper and deeper, and I had a very deep dive into spending 5-6 hours of watching documentaries, all the documentaries on Netflix, on awakening, on secrets of the universe, and anything I could find, I was diving in. And then at some point, my journey started going to Cambodia, to Southeast Asia, to Nepal, which eventually led me to leave New York with one-way ticket to Nepal, where I did my first yoga teacher training there, and then I was traveling to the holy places, to the sacred places, just in a way remembering who I really was under all those masks, under all of those illusions or ideas about who I was in the material reality. And it was parallel to lesson of deep detachment through material world, through friendships, through my health, like the world as I knew it started to fall apart. And it was very, very scary. But at the same time, there was a voice that was guiding me actually all my life that I've heard multiple times. And it was so strong that it's almost like the magnets that you pull close to each other, that I could not do it. It's like there was no plan B. And although the whole thing was collapsing, literally, my world, I started to embark or feel certain seeds of that magic that I was looking for, and that's what kept me going. And I went to Thailand, I did my first Vipassana, and then I did some tantric studies. And that 5-6 month deep reset, being away from familiar place of where I am, and who I was, and the roles that I was playing in the familiar relationships, I believe that's so important, in the late 20s or mid 30s, just to have that travel that's just going to change your whole life. And I always recommend that to younger people, to have that experience, just to open up, this perception of what the world is, what, how people in different parts of the world live, what do they eat, how do they think, how do they pray, and how do they work, how do they communicate with each other, how family structures are, just to be able to observe that. And it has really expanded my perception of the reality of who I was and what the world is. And in some way, I was coming from that place of like, oh, I already know things. And then it was deeply humbled, continue to be humbled daily, knowing that I can only speak from this moment's level of consciousness. And in 5 minutes, my mind can change, So anyway, this journey led me, I returned eventually to New York, but with a completely different perception of, I didn't want to go back to the world that I came from. I was very grateful for that, but I could just see how this was my past, and I'm a new human and person. And at that time, I was still working with plant medicine, so this was part of my journey parallel to everything else I was doing. And somewhere along that journey, I met my husband, Rob, who was also part of the plant medicine circle, and we'd known each other for some time, but he was in previous partnership, and I was on my own journey, until stars and planets decided that it's time. And I mean, he separately from his partner, that was separate story. And then very soon after that, we came together and we started our journey together. And this was about 2020. And when we came together, we both had our dreams, and they were very intersected. And at some point towards the end of that year, when we were started talking about the marriage, I received another message in meditation that we cannot get married on a random date, that, this universe operates in certain cycles, and there is certain wisdom and guidance that is important. And at that time, I didn't know anything about astrology, but I trusted the guidance as always. And so that's how Vedic astrology came into my life. And when our natal charts were opened by my mentor and my friend, Mariana, we were just blown away by how we saw what events in our lives individually, how they came together, and how we're supposed to have our own journeys at the same time that there is a mutual path, a dharma that we need to fulfill. And in that moment, there was a question of how and what tools, and and sometime parallel to that, we started to step away from the plant medicine world, and we were already enrolled in this interfaith, interspiritual seminary, which you know, it was a 2-year experience. And to summarize it, I would quote a founder of the seminary, Diane Burke, how she was explaining, imagine a mountain, a very big mountain. At the root or the bottom of the mountain is very wide. And so if you start walking from different points of the mountain, it seems like these are completely different places. But then the more you start going higher, so first of all, you start seeing more of the world around you, where the mountain you can only see, you know, the 360 around you. But if you go higher, the panorama that you can observe is way bigger. And then the closer you become to the top, all these separate paths, they start coming to the same point. So this interfaith, interspiritual approach is the idea of the one creator presenting themselves, you know, through different traditions, different language, different rituals, a little bit different beliefs. But in the end of the day, you know, this golden rule that we're still learning as humanity about treating each other how we wanted to be treated. You can see that message across all the traditions. And there was some deeper work that I personally had to do in that seminary to dissolve further any illusion of separation between me and the other, whatever the other is in whatever way and form. And so this was a stepping stone when we were leaving something that was part of our lives for 4 years, in this case plant medicine world, and then stepping into this new journey that we could not fully define. While yoga and astrology became more of my area of specialization, and you know, it was my daily practice. And then at some point, the nature started to call very strongly, where while we were still in New York, we moved upstate, and we were searching for the place. I could feel how I no longer can be in the city energies, which I'm grateful again for that school, but I just felt like I've gone through everything that I needed to in order to, you know, like career and all this other roles that we play and toys, we can say. But I was interested more in the path of the nature and nature becoming my teacher. But it was not so easy. It took us a while to find the place. But then, you know, when the time is right, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. In our case, it was our home has appeared in a very synchronistic way. And in the moment when we saw the land, we just knew exactly that was it. You know, our search has come to an end, and my being already was craving for roots so much. And everything that we have collected together with Rob, it was time to put it into action. And when we started dating together, and Rob is very handy, very skillful, brilliant in many ways, he was dreaming of making his own home. And I said, I don't care what you build. I just don't want it to be a box. You know, like you live in the box, you think in the box. I'm tired of this weird constructions where just like they're not friendly. They don't feel organic. They don't feel natural, you know. And again, there was this craving for something which is different. So finally, now we are in the 4th structure that Rob is building. We don't have even one straight wall. Everything is curvy and made with natural materials, you know, and very tall ceilings, just because you feel like, oh, your soul can expand. And we continue to serve in this way, and just living in the jungle. It's been 3.5 years in Mexico, but on our land, 2.5 years. I could see everything that whatever the remains of the previous identity and things that I was ready to shed, they just naturally dissolved, how everything dissolves in nature. In a very organic way, you know, and you start learning from a bird, you start learning from an ant, you know, the monkey comes to you and you communicate with a monkey literally. And I could just feel this deep rewiring that has happened, where I felt, I want to share this with others. I want other people to experience what it is to be so supported, to have that feeling of being so supported by nature, by the elements, to, as a daily screen, to have a nature around you. You know, you've been to our home, you know, like our kitchen is fully transparent. And so
beautiful.
You are always surrounded by the elements, by life always happening around you, you know, and there is a moment to pause and look around. Oh, there's monkeys passing by, you know, or there's some cool bird sound, you go and check. Oh, there's an ant invasion, and it's like a sign it's time to leave the kitchen, you know. So there's just so much there, and my personal observation is through this experience of having nature as your mirror, because like this principle of that we all mirror each other, and it brings you back to your own nature, because we are nature, but it's this constant green background that you have, and the silence, or as you know, nature has her own sounds, but they never are disturbing. It's not like a siren. I remember in New York, this ambulance sounds all the time. But the sounds of the nature, and now we're in the rain season and the frogs are very loud at night, but even that, it's like its own symphony. It does something, and there's so many studies right now that it does something to our psyche, to, our nervous system. And so basically the way I ended up in the world where I am is following my childhood dream of hearing the call of the magic. And now I can definitely tell that I'm living the most magical life. It's not perfect. No one's life is perfect, but it is perfect for me, and it is the most happiest and peaceful I've ever been until now.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. So at your story, from reading your story, you've lived multiple lives. And somebody looking at your life when you were in New York, in a successful career, what was going on within that others were not seeing when you felt like this life is no longer aligned with me? What was going on within you?
It was a series of events. I love this quote of Jim Carrey. He says, I think everyone should get like very wealthy and famous to understand that's not the source of happiness. And I think I had to have my own experience. I was born, it was still Soviet Union time. And our family, when the Soviet collapsed in 91, I was 8 years old. And our family, as many families around us, we were living in this industrial city where we had one major factory producing steel and steel products that basically, 90% of the population was employed. And in that division, of resources that was going on in that time, both my mom and my father, they were not receiving salary for over a year. And as 90% of the population of a city, about 1 million. So there was extreme poverty and scarcity, and of course that created a very deep imprint in my childhood psyche. And it was a natural, it's like this pendulum that if we go one way, that naturally want to go another way. And so initially I was driven as a coach. Now I can say that I understand this mechanism for many of us. I think you can also relate, where we're running away from something. So we go towards something that is opposite of what we have experienced. And that's the drive. But I'm sure you can agree that this is not the healthy way of living. It will get you somewhere. It will get you to really actually high place, of success, of career and ambition and, that ego-driven thing. But behind it, you can see there's a lot of emptiness. There's a lot of pain. There is a lot of trauma. And that was my experience in New York. I'm so grateful for that city that became such an incredible teacher for me and a mirror through others, and I used to say, this is the city where the smartest, the most talented, the most ambitious, the most creative people come together. And at the same time, there is this constant race, of proving, of maintaining that lifestyle, that social recognition and all that comes with it, And on top of it, first in Turkey and then in New York, I was working with very, very wealthy people, very influential people. And of course, there are nuances about the psychology, of the ambitions of the souls, which, is again, as someone who works with people and working with astrology, knowing that we all come here with a certain purpose, with to have certain experiences, also like called curriculum in life. And in that curriculum, we need to go through different lessons, different chapters, and someone may need to realize the ambition of becoming the most successful, the wealthiest person, or the president, or whatever that is, and that's fine. But there is a specific character associated to that, and specific traits, specific behavioral patterns, which are not aligned, let's say, with where my soul was heading to. And that contrast was creating a very weird sense of discomfort, because my mind would tell me, like, hey, you live the most amazing life. You fly private planes, you go to the private islands, and yachts and Michelin star restaurants. And, as that girl who was hungry in her childhood and teens, I had this obsession with clothing, with brand clothing and 150 or even more pairs of shoes and bags, because there was that void that I needed to fulfill with external things as I was watching in the environment around me. That's what people were doing. And so my mind would say, like, hey, this is what most of the people want. You should be happy with this. But there was something inside of me, which, I think it's a very important thing, that voice of honesty, or consciousness, we can say, that's inside of every single one of us. And it's important to listen to that voice that always tries to bring us back to our path. And our path may be very, very different from the environment that we grew up or what we are in. And usually, at least I observe it a lot, that it's usually implied to be very, very different. So we need to have that experience of walking away from something that we created, we built with our hands, we put so much energy, we put so much of our time and resource, and then learn that lesson of detachment, of letting it go, because it's no longer resonating, it's no longer serving. And so that transition, I can say a specific moment, which was, I felt like I hit my bottom. I always had a heart that I was connected to. Like, heart was always something that, not as an organ, but as a center that I was orienting myself towards, that kindness and love. And I was living on Upper East Side in New York. And I was walking home, and there was a homeless person sitting close to my apartment or my building, and he was smelling. And I think, it was early in spring, but the weather was hot, so I could feel the smell. And I felt disgust because of humanness of this human. And I came home, and I felt disgust for the second time, but this time with myself. I realized I have lost something that was my North Star, my heart that was always leading and guiding me, that I became one of those people who I was afraid of becoming, who I was felt like, this is what I definitely don't want in my life. And that's what happened, that my heart has closed. And that was kind of like a very painful moment to accept within myself. And I knew that I have to get out of the city. And then, because I still had financial privilege at that time, I remember I left New York for a couple of months, and I went to Europe. I went to Ukraine to see my mom. I went to different places where I had friends. And some of them were, in Paris or bigger cities, but some of them were in smaller cities in Europe. And it was summer, and I remember just that human connection, like seeing the people who I love, seeing the people who remind me of who I was. And it softened me, and I just realized, like, this is what I want. I want community, I want relationship. I no longer want these ambitions and proving something to myself and to others. And when I returned back, that's actually when I got my apartment, but it was already in New Jersey. It was still with a view of Manhattan and the Hudson, very beautiful view. But I think I left a certain part of me that represented that toughness, that, rigidness and ego. And I consciously decided that that's what I need to work on and step away from. And then, as I said, there were many other steps, but that was the critical moment that made the biggest change.
So you stepped back into your apartment and you felt like that version of you was no longer
I think
resonating with you?
In that moment, I was still that version, but
Mm.
I could feel the aversion to the version that I was living in that moment, because I felt that that was not my true self. And I'm just imagining maybe it was Jesus in disguise, or a saint in disguise in the form of that homeless person, in this way reminding me of the truth of who I really was. But it was in a painful way. And again, I think it's such an important thing that we are honest with ourselves and that we listen to the voice that speaks to us in these quiet moments, even if it says something that we may not like in the present moment. It's still important to listen.
Yana, you've accumulated such a rich life, so many different experiences, from yoga and spending time at ashrams and then finding your guru. Can you tell me a little bit more about the moment when you felt like you were ready to share your gifts with others?
Again, I'll go back to my childhood, as I really feel there are so many answers about who we are in earlier stages of our lives, just based on our interests. And because it's so natural, it's still unpolluted with society, with conditioning. And there was always this part of me which liked to share, which liked to uplift people. I think that was the biggest thing, and continues to be for me. I have a very close childhood friend, and I remember we both studied linguistics. I moved to Kiev when I was 16, and she stayed with her parents, and she studied in the hometown where we were. And then I just felt it's time for her, because she spoke 3 languages, and I knew that she's not going to be able to use them in the hometown where we were, and it would be so great for her to move out and have different experiences. And I remember coming to her with these brochures for au pair. It's like this European program where young people go to families and they spend time with children, but they also practice the languages that they know. And I remember coming to her on a mission, and almost like selling her this program, convincing her that that's something that she should do. And she ended up doing it, and she moved out, and now she lives in Europe, and had a very great experience with that. So there was always some kind of this guidance that I would feel about myself and about others. Of course, in earlier parts of my life, I would not always ask permission to introduce into someone's life, and that was also my learning, where now it's only by invite. If someone asks me for advice or for my service, that's when I put on my hat of a guide or teacher, consultant. But otherwise, how my mom says, I zip my lip. And it was a very beautiful experience with yoga. I've been, as I said, practicing for many, many years. And then we were somewhere in Pennsylvania, and we were having this beautiful retreat with plant medicine, and then someone led yoga, and I think I also added something, and they said, you would be such a great teacher. Why don't you do this? And until that moment, it never occurred to me. And I was like, oh yeah, maybe. And then when I did my first teacher training in Nepal, right after that, I went to this Buddhist monastery. And I spent a couple of weeks there, and this was a little bit outside of Kathmandu, and it was a beautiful place called Kopan. And there were some other seekers like myself from different parts of the world. And then, we were exchanging our life journeys and experiences. And I, of course, shared that I just graduated from this teacher training. And they said, oh, please teach us yoga, because somehow, right now I think it's very difficult to find people who have not practiced, but somehow at that table, no one has practiced yoga before. And so my first teaching experience was on the rooftop in this monastery, in the place where we were staying, kind of like the dorm. And with the view of the mountains, it's not like the big Himalayas, but the mountains surrounding the Kathmandu Valley. And I have taught my first classes there. And then later it came to me like, what an honor, to be initiated in such place, which again, I connect to my past lives. And then, since then the idea was planted. And then before that, in 2009, I did my first coaching training. And this was the time when I was doing my MBA. And my beloved professor, Banu, she was teaching leadership skills. She said, you're so good with people. You should do this coaching education. And I'm like, I'm so young. I was like 25, 26. And she said, no, it's going to help you tremendously. And so that's another thing, I did it for myself first, and then slowly I started to implement this. And I can see how, it was a red thread throughout my whole life, where whatever I would find for myself beneficial and useful, there would be a natural desire to share, which again, I think it's for many of us, it's a nature that we have, sharing nature as humans, and if we find something beautiful, interesting, and resonates, we'd like to offer it to those who we love and care about. And so this way, with yoga, I think I was still not ready to teach, and now I understand, in the West, there is this understanding of yoga as the asanas, as the physical aspect of practice, where in reality, according to Patanjali, which is this sage who came as a teacher and delivered the Patanjali Sutras, and it's almost like a Bible of yoga, but it's not a religious script. It's more conduct of living. And the asanas, the physical aspect of the practice, is only 1/8 of the whole body of wisdom of yoga. And I feel very, very grateful and honored that I had the chance to study in Nepal, to study in India, to be close to the source, to receive these teachings, and of course through my guru, to understand how deep this teaching goes and how transformational it is. And I'm deeply steeped in India. It's not even a religion. It's called Sanatana Dharma, which is the path, the eternal path that continues and spreads out to all the world, not even in India, that we all are essential elements of this creation, and we all contribute to it with our gifts and talents and our energy. And it's like a symphony that is played all over the world globally in every moment throughout however this creation has existed. And just to think of, like, yes, on the one end, human life in the eyes of the eternity is nothing, like whatever, 80, 100 years. But at the same time, if you are listening to a symphony, and one instrument is out of tune, you would hear it, so it's this interesting paradox. And so this body of teachings of yoga, of Jyotish, which is Vedic astrology, of Ayurveda, which is the science of nutrition, of Vastu, which is the science of space, and Tantra, which, is just a general understanding how all of the creation plays together. We can say masculine and feminine, but it's the unity of all. So it's a very comprehensive body of knowledge. In some way, you can say it's a manual for any human on Earth living in any time, which provides a roadmap of what's the most aligned way of living. And again, I will highlight that it has nothing to do with religion. It's a completely practical way of understanding that, like the boomerang, if you throw it, it's going to come back to you. Or another, recently I read this beautiful expression, for example, for astrology, because, some people debate, if it's, something woo-woo or just a made-up science. I like this comparison. So you can say that the clock on the wall does not affect your life, and yet we live according to the time that it shows. So same way with the planets, we may say, I don't care, like how, whatever, Jupiter can affect my life. But yet we are exposed to these energies all the time, and it is wise to know what actually affects in our lives. Same thing, we cannot see gravity, and yet we're all bonded to this planet. And so slowly starting to peel the layers of this wisdom and opening it up and seeing how it plays out in my life, in our life with Rob, and everything that we create. Of course, there is natural desire, and slowly I started to weave more and more into my work with people. And it's very difficult to define by one, definition of what I do. I can quote some of my clients, because sometimes I ask, I'm blessed with many beautiful souls who I have been accompanying for years on the journey, and I'm quite creative in my expression. I don't like to repeat myself, and so usually what the offerings that I make, they around the same maybe modalities, but they always have a different flavor and spice, So in one way I can say I am an agent of transformation, because as you said, that I've had so many lifetimes in this body where I always welcome change. And I'm actually a firm believer that change is good, even if it's painful, even if it's difficult. When the time passes, we can see why what happened had to happen, and change is the path of evolution. And so welcoming that change in my life has opened me to a deeper layers of myself and deeper experience of myself. And so, as I said, even in the moment, it may not feel so good, but there is a gift on the other end, you know. And if we are curious and open enough to receive that gift, then we just get to know ourselves in this creation deeper. So going through so many changes and transformations myself, I became very familiar with them because there is a certain algorithm. You know, everything moves in cycles and everything has a certain pattern. When you plant a seed of apple, an orange will not gonna grow from it. You know, from the apple seed, apple will grow. And so in a certain way, you know, this in a very simplified way of there is a dissolution, there is that death of transformation, and then there is a rebirth. And so this is a very simple formula of transformation. And when I was talking about my journey when I went to Nepal and had this first massive dissolution and collapse of the world how I knew it, that was scary because I didn't have anyone by my side who would guide me and say, it's okay, this is how it is. But going through that many, many times, you know, and having this dissolution of identities, of previous modalities that I practice, or even belief systems, now I can comfortably navigate if, you know, something quite big happens in my life. As you know, I just recently had a miscarriage at the 10-week term, and I really took it as a gift, and I continue to take it as a gift because I can see how I was giving a new experience which I have never experienced before. And I recognize that at some point I will have to give this body back to earth. So my lesson of detachment and letting go through these laws is the same approach of understanding that I need to let go because at some point I will have to let go of everything. And so not attaching, not clinging to something that I even, you know, I want so much or I love, it helps me to navigate through these currents of patterns of transformation in a harmonious way. And that's also something that I can lead others through. And usually people come to me, there are two patterns. Either they're ready for the change, and it's a very kind of like, okay, I'm stable right now, but in some way they're ready for destruction and they just need me to be the hammer. Because, you know, there's this joke about the universe, how the universe works, or God, or however you name it. First, it's a tap, tap. Then it's a knock, knock. And then it's a bang, bang. And so if we miss the tap, if we miss the knock, the bang comes. And those who are able to tap into that tap and feel like, okay, there is something coming my way, but I'm not sure how to go about it, you know, that's a great time to work with me because I'm able to create the experience where we start gently taking apart certain things and see what's working, what's not. Another version when people come to me is when they're already in the crisis, but it's not in the moment when someone is drowning. When someone is drowning, they just need to ask for a lifebuoy, you know, for like a raft. And that's usually, you know, a critical moment. But when they already on the raft, when they already like, okay, I can breathe, I'm centered, and I understand that there is something I can do about this. I'm not a victim of my circumstances. There is something that is guiding me towards somewhere I just cannot see right now. So this is another version where, you know, people come to me, and I always use the Vedic astrology, the blue chart, the blueprint, the chart of the person, seeing what kind of transit they're going through, you know, because Vedic astrology is very deep, and it only looks at the layer of lessons for this personality in this incarnation. It also looks at what is the path of the spirit and the soul, what as a spirit and soul I came here to learn. And those lessons, they may not always be pleasant, what the mind will like, but they are inevitable. And I haven't met any human who wouldn't ever go through the experience of some kind of pain or loss or trouble. But astrology being the study of and the science of cycles, it just shows us, okay, this time is good for this, you know, and this time is when we start going into that cocoon, you know, in order to come out of the butterfly. And then in that time, you know, using this guidance as a map, showing like, okay, this is the timeline. The time has come for you to get bigger in some way, you know. And I think I'm good about also highlighting the positive moments, you know, kind of like the silver lining that follows our life journey. Because in the challenging moments, sometimes we may go into this phase of shrinking, of fear and doubts. And it's really, really helpful to have someone by your side who has gone through this multiple times, and at the same time who talks specifically about what you're going through, and mirroring the powerful characteristics, the strength that you carry, and then mirroring it back to you, empowering, like, okay, this is what you can lean on to. Because we never left without the support. Even in the darkest night that we always have something to lean on. It's just nice to have someone who comes with a torch or the flashlight to say, like, hey, this is something that you can lean on. And I use, in my yoga has been my practice for over 9 years daily. And now I have 2 practices of Kundalini yoga in the morning and Kriya yoga at night. And then I use astrology daily because I never make any decision, without consulting the stars, including the day of this interview, because it has proven me of how great aligned life feels, how we are when we're moving with the waves instead of trying to paddle against them. And it just makes a more harmonious living.
So you're one of the most disciplined person I know. You truly show up every single day with your practices, and you lead by example. So how do you show up when you don't even feel like it on days and you don't feel like showing up? How do you keep going with your practices?
Yeah, initially I was reflecting of how does this work, and in the first couple years, I can say, or maybe 2-3 years, I had to fit my practice into my life, where I would find the time. And I used to travel a lot, so it'd be like, in the airport, and meditation room, prayer room, wherever I would find some kind of behind the chairs, on the buses. I remember all kinds of things. So it was, I can say, an inconvenience, but I think it was my inner conviction. And according to the scriptures, that I will start with the word guru, because I am a student of my guru in India. The guru means the principle that brings us from the darkness to the light. And this concept of darkness, which is present in many vocabularies of many traditions, in some ways our own ignorance. It's not knowing. But ignorance should not be an offense, because no matter how long I study, till the rest of my life, I will continue to have an ignorance, because it's impossible to study the whole creation in one lifetime. But it just allows us to have this mindset of a student who is saying, okay, so there are many things that I don't know, and furthermore, I don't know what I even don't know. And to have this curiosity, which also helps us to be humble in knowing that every single person, like that homeless person, is a teacher in disguise. We have direct teachers, but we also have teachers in disguise. Our partners, our tough bosses, whatever, complex relationships, these are all teachers and teaching opportunities. And so initially I was relying on my teachers, who were saying that this is something that really works. This is something that will bring you lots of goodness, lots of stability and sense of foundation in your life. And I'm blessed to have incredible teachers. And this was something that I always had, from the moment that I started to understand that the journey is so big and I need some kind of guidance. And no matter whatever, I have my own perception and experience, which is very important. I also need a guidance in a simple way, like in order to make a recipe, you look for it. You look for the recipe of someone who made that, and you try it out, and you made something of your own, but still you need some kind of a base of foundation, right, as a guidance. And in order to write, in order to read, we needed to have teachers who would guide us on our journeys. And so that initial boost I received from trusting my teachers, who were saying that this is good, this will help you throughout your life, but this has to be daily practice. And then there was a switch. I don't remember exactly at what point, but I remember the moment where, let's say, I felt really bad, something happened in my life, and I went to practice, and I felt how practice was giving me back. Instead of being an obligation, instead of being something that drags me, because it's monotonous, and sometimes it feels good, sometimes it just is, it has to be done. But in that moment I realized that now all that energy that I have invested, it was never wasted. It comes back, and it comes back in a form. Now I say I have like 2 railing bars, like my morning practice and my evening practice. So I know no matter what happens throughout that day, I know how my day will begin, I know how my day will end. And from that, feeding the practice into life, the way it transitioned, it became fitting life into my practice. And then in some way, like, life now revolves around that. And a very simple joke I make: if we learn to brush teeth every day, I mean, 99% of people, I think, brush their teeth daily, probably twice a day, we can learn anything. It's just a matter of understanding. And sometimes it goes on faith of like, okay, I believe that I should do this, but at some point we will start feeling the benefit, and that experience of our own will continue to carry us through. And another question that I ask myself: okay, if I'm not going to do this, what will I replace it with? A screen time? No, seriously, like, if I'm not going to do my practice, do I utilize every minute of my day that I can say I really don't have time, and then whatever, like, hour of my practice will free up so much space? But I have to be honest with myself and know that, I'm a human like everyone else, and sometimes I spend on my phone too much time. So I know that there is nothing I can put instead of this which will make me feel better and make my life more meaningful.
Beautiful. What would be some of the practices that you would recommend to somebody to do every single day that you feel has brought you a lot of groundedness and stability and peace in your life?
A very simple practice. It's actually something I practice now with my husband for over 5 years every night. Is the practices of gratitude. Mm-hmm. When we are in bed, we say each other, what are we grateful for that day? And sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's deep, sometimes it's big, sometimes it's short, but it's just something that to end the day on a note of gratitude. And this is more for relationship advice, but it can go, I will continue further. But in the relationship, this is just something that remembering that your partner is your gift, your partner is a sacred witness to your life. And we have this saying that you are my gift from God. And it's just something that helps to nourish that well of the relationship, of that source that continues to feed you both. But even if someone is single, just starting the day with gratitude practices. And that's what I was doing before I met Rob. My journals of daily gratitude, or just, or that path of the artist that has free writing. When you just wake up and you allow to write. I mean, writing is such an amazing gift. I know we more and more disconnected from that, and myself included, but whenever I feel like I need to talk to God, and sometimes it's on the plane, sometimes it's in different circumstances, I pull out my notebook and a pen and I just ask a question, and then I start writing, and it's such an incredible guidance that is available to everyone. I mean, almost except for those who may not have their fingers, but maybe the talk could be a replacement of that, but mostly available to everyone. And it's simple, and it just allows us to connect deeper to ourselves. And then, of course, as a yoga teacher, I can say, move your body as much as you can. And even if it's not yoga, it can be dance, it can be something, but just remembering that we are in this physical material reality, and we have this physical body that loves to move, actually, and it may be stiff, and maybe this and maybe that. But over these years of teaching so many people, like, it's just seeing the change between beginning of the class and end of the class. In the end of the class, everyone is more, smiley and relaxed. Sometimes people have sadness, and the sadness usually comes from like, why am I not doing this in my life? That's the only sadness that I've experienced in the class, where people just like, okay, like, this feels so good. Why am I not implementing this on a daily basis? But yeah, this is something simple. And then the third one, I would say, connect to nature daily. Just a little bit standing barefoot on the ground, or hugging a tree, or, if you're in Manhattan and there's no tree around, look at the sky, but something, just some way of connecting to the nature, which just helps us to connect back to ourselves. And this is a good way to start. And then, there are so many different ways And I think now in this day and time, the issue that we have, that we are overwhelmed with, there is so much, and at the same time, the question is like, what is mine in all of this? And one of the tips that I gave already, look at your childhood, you know, just really what nourished you, what was interesting to you, what was just like, wow, exciting, even if in this moment something may not spark that curiosity. And then looking into that, or already, you know, as a coach, sometimes people ready to step into that unknown, like, okay, I've done my corporate job, wherever, but I feel I'm here for something else, but I don't know where to start. And, you know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If you lived on earth for 30 years or 40 years already, there is already plenty of things that you're good at, that people ask your advice for, that you just naturally lean into, even, you know, when no one is watching, you know, maybe at a hobby, or even our Instagram interests. You know, we only follow what is interesting to us, what is inspiring to us. And even if someone experiences like jealousy towards someone, that's a good sign. Turn the jealousy into a motivation, into fuel, because we can only be jealous of something that resonates with us, but we jealous of the person who already succeeded and we're not. And it's just one way of expressing that energy. But in reality, it's also a guidance towards like, okay, we want that too. And so there's just this roadmap of how we navigate. And actually this new moon, third or fourth day after the new moon, I started a course called The Experiment, which came out of the playful state. You know, we're in summer, and generally summer is the season where we're more open, you know, the weather is good and we're more outdoorsy, and there are fruits and veggies, and we connect, you know, we go on vacations and connect with friends and family. So no matter what age we are, we're just more open to receive and have this exchange with the creation. And this experiment came as something that I recently went to India, you know, with my mom, and traveled for over a month. And every day was something new, you know, like some kind of new experience. Sometimes they're challenging adventures, but it's not how I usually live my life. You know, my life is very structured and disciplined. And here I am. I mean, of course, I was still doing my practice, but other than my practice, there was no stability. Every single day, there was something new. And then in the end of that experience, I felt so refreshed. I felt like my inner screen was fully reloaded. And even my practice became more exciting. You know, my love for my husband, who I already love so much, I just started to feel and see new things about him in my reality. And I was contemplating, like, what made that change? And I was thinking of like this ability to be playful and experience new things, at the same time, every single time closing the loop. You know, it's like not just opening new tabs, but like, okay, I opened, I looked at you, I played with you, and then I closed you. You know, so there is nothing pending that's like, oh, I need to return back to this, I need to return back to that. And so the experiment is a 10-week journey where every week I'm a chef, and I offer a meal with 3 courses. The first course is that you choose something to add into your life for 1 week only. And there will be a theme. Like there were 10 weeks and then 10 different themes. Like, for example, one theme is body, right? So you add a new meditation or physical practice for 11 minutes for that week, and you practice it every day just for 1 week. Because 1 week is easy to commit, you know, it's not something that is overburdening. And then another meal is you extract something from your life, you know, a screen, a habit that is not very serving you, or whatever that is. And then the third meal is you deepening in something. I can offer what that can be, or you decide for yourself. Let's say if you work already on something, or you want to, you know, go deeper with that, this is the time where you're like, okay, I commit to 1 hour daily for this thing for 1 week again. And then I pair this meal with your astrological recommendation, with your blueprint. So then it kind of highlights of like, okay, how, like, if you do this, this is what the energies are, how are they supporting you, and how this can be helpful for your journey. And then also, you know, I will be sharing a meditation or practice for the week if someone wants like to take on further. And because I mostly work with women, I also pair it with a menstrual cycle. Like, for example, I'm not going to take a chocolate from you if you're on your period, you know? So I have played enough in the masculine world to know, like, no, we have our own rules, we have our own flow, literally. And so we need to honor that flow of life. And then in the end of the week, we have a call and we talk about these things, So this is a way of how one can be playful, how one can bring new habits into own life, try them out. 10 weeks is a good time to experiment and then see what stays. But I guarantee that after that type of experience, after commitment, there will be sense of like, okay, more clarity coming. Like there is something that I like, there is something that I don't like. And this is actually something that is really helping me. So this is how I open my playground and invite everyone to play with me starting June 17.
For people who are navigating through transitions in their life where their old identity, old beliefs, and old versions of themselves are dying, but the new parts of them has not been birthed yet, and they're in this in-between world where they're not really feeling who they truly are, what would your recommendation for someone who's going through that?
So I think it's important to understand that there is this universal principle of correspondence, as above, so below, as outside, so within. And as humanity, in some way, we're going through the process, and this process probably has started before we were born and will continue after we go. And just to know that what we're going through is the mirror of the universal principle. And at the same time, it is part of the journey. It's not a mistake. It's not, oh, I made a wrong turn. It's exactly what we're supposed to do and go through in this lifetime. And what I always say to myself and share with my teacher or students and clients is we only need to know our next step. It's the mind that wants to figure it all, to know, everything of like, oh, what's going to be happening in 1 year, in 2 years, in 5 years. Where in reality, and I think our life, and since COVID, it has shown us that the long-term planning is no longer a thing because the world is changing so fast that it's impossible to predict anything. I'm relying on the words of my guru who says we're moving in a better direction. Just generally, and that's also how I feel. And how they say that right before the dawn, it's like the darkest hour, right? So we may feel like we are in this dark hour individually and collectively, but at the same time, the laws of the universe also show us that, right, this is the pattern, this is the way. And it is important to return back to very simple things, and very simple thing is my breath. If I can connect in the moment of panic, in the moment of despair, just to my own breathing or to my body, and figure out, it's like, okay, what do I need to do in the next hour? If this is the panic, it's like, okay, I can have some water, I can have a meal, I can have a walk. This is also a very healing practice. And then training ourselves to inhabit more the present moment. Mm-hmm. For all of us, I think, because the future is so uncertain, and at the same time, we are creating the future in the present moment. And so the more we are grounded, the more we are peaceful, the more we are loving and kind, this is the future we're creating for ourselves and for everyone on earth going forward.
We're the co-creators with the universe.
Yes, absolutely.
So more presence.
Yeah.
More breaths.
Yeah, more breath. Exactly.
Beautiful, thank you. Well, you shared so many great wisdom, which I'm sure people listening will take so much from this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joy.
Was there anything else that you would like to share with whoever's listening? Any last words?
Sure. Believe in yourself. Believe in your journey. Believe in the force that brought you here. By this time, if you're listening to this, you are at the age to able to understand that there is some kind of power, there is some kind of force that is guiding the whole creation and is guiding you in every moment of your life. And in every single human being, and this comes from me as an astrologist looking at so many charts, there is a gift, there is a talent, there is something, there is uniquely ours that we came here to share. And trust in that voice that tells you that it is time. Thank you.